What happens when the pole sitter loses the lead? The championship leader takes control. The home hero crashes out almost immediately. Strategy starts changing every few laps, and the race is turned upside down by a late virtual safety car. You get the 2026 Dutch Grand Prix. And this was not simply another Lando Norris victory. This was a race Norris had to win more than once. He survived the chaos at the beginning, lost the lead to Kimi Antonelli at the restart, spent a huge part of the race chasing the Mercedes, and then used tire strategy and raw pace to turn the situation around. By the checkered flag, Norris had transformed what looked like Antonelli's race into an 11-second victory. But behind him, Mercedes had its own drama. George Russell was asked to move aside for Antonelli. Lewis Hamilton was hunting the Mercedes pair. Charles Leclerc was right there too. Oscar Piastri had a frustrating afternoon. And for Max Verstappen, what should have been an emotional home Grand Prix ended almost before it had properly started. So how exactly did Norris turn this race around? Why couldn't Antonelli convert his early advantage into victory? And what does this result tell us about the championship fight? Welcome back to Racecraft Explained. Let's break down the 2026 Dutch Grand Prix. Going into Sunday, Lando Norris had already put himself in the perfect position, pole position, George Russell alongside him, championship leader Kimi Antonelli starting third, Oscar Piastri fourth, and behind them came the Ferraris of Lewis Hamilton and Charles Leclerc, followed by Max Verstappen. But there was another factor hanging over the entire race: the weather. Rain had arrived before the start, leaving parts of Zandvoort damp and making tire choice much more difficult than it normally would have been. Most of the field eventually committed to slick tires. The leading group mainly went with mediums, while several cars further back chose softer rubber. That meant everybody was trying to answer the same question: how much grip was actually available? At Zandvoort, that question matters enormously. The circuit is narrow. The corners flow quickly into one another. There are banked sections, elevation changes, and very little room for mistakes. And when parts of the circuit are still damp, the difference between the racing line and the wrong piece of asphalt can be enormous. The field completed its formation lap. The cars stopped on the grid, the lights came on, and immediately, the race started changing. Norris made a good enough launch to protect first place. But behind him, Antonelli reacted brilliantly. The Mercedes driver attacked George Russell and moved into second. That was important, because Antonelli was now directly behind Norris with the same basic opportunity in front of him. Leclerc also moved forward, getting ahead of Piastri, and behind them, the Red Bulls were fighting. Then came the moment that completely changed the atmosphere at Zandvoort. Max Verstappen lost control and crashed out. For the Dutch fans, it was the result nobody wanted to see. His home Grand Prix was over almost immediately. The amount of debris meant race control had little choice. Red flag, everyone returned to the pit lane, and suddenly, the opening phase of the race had effectively been erased. Norris was still leading. But now everyone had time to reconsider tires, settings, and strategy. And that would become extremely important, because when the race restarted, Norris changed to soft tires. Mercedes kept Antonelli and Russell on mediums. Piastri went in a completely different direction and selected the hard tire. 3 different approaches. 1, restart. And this time, Antonelli got it absolutely right. When the lights went out again, Antonelli launched the Mercedes perfectly. Norris couldn't stop him. Antonelli took the lead. Piastri also made a strong restart and got ahead of Russell. Within seconds, the structure of the race had completely changed. Antonelli first, Norris second, Piastri third, Russell fourth, and the Ferraris waiting just behind. This was a fascinating situation for Norris. He was on the softer tire. On paper, that should provide more immediate grip, but it also meant tire management was going to become critical. Antonelli, meanwhile, began building a small gap, and that gap mattered because once he moved far enough ahead, Norris could no longer rely on the additional overtaking assistance available when following closely. Antonelli wasn't disappearing into the distance, but he was controlling the race. And this is where the young Mercedes driver deserves enormous credit. He didn't take the lead in panic. He settled into his rhythm. He managed the tires. He kept Norris behind. And for a significant part of this Grand Prix, Antonelli looked completely capable of winning it. But Norris never allowed the gap to become comfortable. That became the foundation of his comeback. This was probably the most important phase of Norris's race. Sometimes winning Formula One races isn't about immediately attacking. It's about staying close enough that the leader can never relax. Norris kept Antonelli under pressure. The gap moved around. Sometimes it was just over a second. Sometimes Norris closed it again, but the McLaren stayed within striking distance. Behind them, another battle was developing. Russell had Leclerc and Hamilton applying pressure. Ferrari suddenly looked much more competitive than they had at certain stages of the weekend. And Piastri, who had initially gained position, began facing his own problems. Then the first serious pit stop phase began. Russell stopped first among the leading group and switched to the hard tire. Piastri followed a lap later, but his stop wasn't particularly clean, and that cost him valuable track position. Then came the big one. Antonelli and Norris stopped together. Both moved onto hard tires. And once again, there wasn't enough between them for Norris to immediately attack. But something was starting to change. Lap after lap, Norris began reducing the gap. The McLaren looked strong over the longer run. Antonelli still had track position, but Norris was making him work harder and harder to keep it. And behind them, Ferrari was beginning to make life uncomfortable for almost everyone. Charles Leclerc was aggressive. He attacked Piastri and eventually found a way ahead. Then Hamilton arrived, and he also passed the McLaren. Suddenly, Piastri, who had restarted in third place, had fallen down the order. That was a major contrast inside McLaren. One car was fighting for victory. The other was steadily losing ground. Meanwhile, Hamilton had stretched his first stint and temporarily found himself at the front during the pit cycle. Ferrari now had options, but they also had a problem. Hamilton was catching Leclerc. The two Ferrari drivers ended up close together, and Hamilton clearly believed he had the pace to go forward. Ferrari's handling of that situation became another small subplot in an already complicated race. Leclerc eventually stopped. Hamilton remained out. And while Ferrari was managing its own internal battle, McLaren and Mercedes were preparing for the decisive phase. At around the middle of the race, Antonelli was still leading Norris. But Norris was getting closer. Then Mercedes blinked. Antonelli made another stop. Russell followed. Norris stayed out longer. And this is where McLaren created the opportunity that ultimately won the race. When Antonelli pitted, Norris remained on track. That gave McLaren something incredibly valuable: a tire offset. In simple terms, Antonelli would have newer tires immediately, but when Norris eventually stopped, Norris would then have tires several laps fresher than the Mercedes. At a circuit where overtaking isn't always straightforward, that difference could be crucial. Norris made his second stop and returned to the track behind Antonelli. The gap was a little over 5 seconds. At first glance, that might have looked comfortable for Mercedes. It wasn't. Norris started taking huge chunks out of the gap. 5 seconds became 4. 4 became 3. Then 2. Only a few laps later, Norris was right there. Antonelli was beginning to struggle with the rear of his car. And Norris had exactly what he needed: grip, confidence, and fresher tires. This was the moment where the race switched from strategy to execution. McLaren had created the chance. Now, Norris had to finish the job. Part 7. The overtake for the win. As Norris closed in, Antonelli had one small advantage. Lewis Hamilton was still ahead and had not yet completed his final stop. Because Antonelli was close enough to Hamilton, he had access to extra overtaking assistance. That also made him harder for Norris to attack. So Norris wasn't simply trying to overtake a Mercedes on older tires. He was trying to pass a Mercedes that was receiving help from the car ahead. But Norris didn't wait. He attacked into turn 1, and he made it stick. That was the move that decided the race. Not because the Grand Prix immediately ended there. There was still plenty of drama to come. But Norris had done the hardest part. He had taken back the position that Antonelli stole from him at the restart. Then, Norris quickly cleared Hamilton as well, and returned to the actual lead of the Grand Prix. Antonelli also passed Hamilton, and suddenly, the picture became clear. Norris first, Antonelli chasing, Hamilton needing to pit. But Formula One rarely lets a race like this finish quietly. And only moments later, another strategic opportunity appeared. Esteban Ocon stopped on track. Virtual safety car. Immediately, teams recognized an opportunity. A pit stop under virtual safety car conditions costs significantly less race time than a normal green flag stop. Antonelli came in. Mercedes fitted fresh soft tires. Hamilton also stopped. Norris stayed out. Now we had the perfect ingredients for a late race chase. Norris had track position. Antonelli had much fresher tires, and Russell was sitting between them. For a moment, Norris wondered whether McLaren should have stopped too, but the opportunity disappeared. The race went green again. And now the question was simple. Could Antonelli use those soft tires to catch Norris? At first, it looked possible. Antonelli started closing on Russell, but Norris did something extremely important. He kept producing strong lap times despite being on older tires. Instead of becoming a sitting target, Norris maintained a significant gap. Antonelli's fresh tires were useful, but not useful enough. Mercedes therefore faced another decision. Their championship leader was stuck behind his teammate. If Russell remained ahead, Antonelli's fresh tires would be wasted. So, Mercedes made the call. And that's understandable. Every driver wants the podium. Every driver wants to finish ahead of his teammate. But Mercedes was looking at the championship picture. Antonelli arrived at Zandvoort leading the standings. Fresh tires, more pace at that moment, and a chance, at least theoretically, to chase Norris. Russell eventually moved aside. Antonelli took second. But Mercedes had created another problem. Lewis Hamilton was now right behind Russell, and Charles Leclerc wasn't far away either. Russell suddenly went from helping his teammate to defending his own podium. This turned the final laps into a completely different battle. Antonelli couldn't reach Norris, so the victory was effectively gone. But third, fourth, and fifth were still incredibly close. Hamilton attacked, Russell defended, Leclerc waited for any opening. Then another virtual safety car briefly interrupted the fight. When racing resumed, Russell had one job. Don't make a mistake. He didn't. Norris crossed the line first. Antonelli came home second. Russell held third. Hamilton finished fourth. Leclerc fifth. And Piastri, after a difficult afternoon, finished sixth. So what actually won this race for Lando Norris? There are three main reasons. First, he stayed patient after losing the lead. It would have been very easy for Norris to destroy his tires, trying to immediately attack Antonelli. Instead, he remained close and waited for the race to develop. Second, McLaren created a tire advantage. By running Norris longer before his second stop, they gave him fresher tires for the decisive battle. That meant when Norris caught Antonelli, he wasn't simply relying on bravery. He had a genuine performance advantage. And third, Norris executed when the opportunity arrived. Strategy can put you behind another car with better tires, but the driver still has to overtake. Norris got close. He committed. He passed Antonelli, and then he controlled the final phase even after Mercedes gave Antonelli fresh, soft tires. That's why this was more impressive than a simple lights-to-flag win. Norris started from pole, lost first place, recovered it on track, and then managed the final challenge. That's a complete race victory. It's also important not to look at Antonelli's second place as a failure. Yes, he led. Yes, he had an opportunity to win, but he also produced one of the strongest performances of the weekend. His restart was excellent. His early race management was controlled. He kept Norris behind for a long time. And even after losing the victory, second place was extremely valuable for the championship. After Zandvoort, Antonelli's championship advantage increased to 59 points. That is the bigger picture. Norris won the battle. Antonelli strengthened his position in the war for the championship. And that's what makes the next races so interesting. Because Norris is finding momentum at exactly the moment Antonelli is building a championship cushion. Oscar Piastri's sixth place is another result worth examining. Starting fourth, he had opportunities. He made an excellent restart and briefly moved into third. But from there, the race slowly slipped away. The hard tire strategy did not deliver the same advantage McLaren might have hoped for. Slow pit stops hurt him. Leclerc got past. Hamilton got past. And while Norris was fighting at the front, Piastri became increasingly isolated. This wasn't a disastrous result. But when your teammate wins the Grand Prix in the same car, sixth place always raises questions. McLaren clearly had race-winning performance. Norris extracted it, Piastri didn't. Ferrari finished fourth and fifth. That sounds respectable. But watching the race, it felt like more might have been possible. Leclerc was aggressive and made important overtakes. Hamilton had strong pace and at different moments looked capable of attacking the podium positions. But strategy, timing, and the way Ferrari managed its two drivers prevented either car from fully exploiting the opportunity. Hamilton eventually finished less than a second behind Russell. Leclerc was only around half a second behind Hamilton. That means the margins were tiny. One different call, one cleaner sequence, one better positioned car. And Ferrari might have been celebrating a podium. Instead, Mercedes took 2 of the 3 trophies. With Verstappen out immediately, Red Bull's hopes were suddenly placed on Liam Lawson. And Lawson delivered a solid 7th place. It wasn't spectacular, but under the circumstances, it mattered. He kept the car in the points and brought home a useful result during his stand-in appearance. Behind him, Nico Hülkenberg finished 8th for Audi. Fernando Alonso took 9th for Aston Martin. And Pierre Gasly completed the points in 10th. But for Red Bull, the biggest story remained Verstappen. At his home race, surrounded by orange grandstands and huge expectations, his Grand Prix ended almost immediately. Motorsport can be cruel. And now we come to the biggest question. Can Norris turn this into a real championship comeback? After Zandvoort, Antonelli remains firmly in control of the standings. He has 242 points. Russell and Hamilton are tied behind him on 183. Norris sits 4th, 83 points away from Antonelli. That's a big gap. But it's not impossible, especially because Norris has now won consecutive Grands Prix. Momentum is starting to shift. McLaren appears capable of fighting at the front, and if Norris keeps producing weekends like this, Antonelli cannot simply cruise toward the championship. But Norris needs more than victories. He needs consistency. He needs McLaren to keep improving. And he needs Mercedes to start dropping points. Antonelli, meanwhile, doesn't necessarily need to beat Norris every weekend. If he keeps finishing 2nd, 3rd, and 4th while his rivals take points away from each other, his championship position remains extremely strong. That's why Zandvoort might become important later in the season. Norris won the race. But Antonelli left with an even bigger championship lead. 2 drivers. 2 very different reasons to be satisfied. The final Dutch Grand Prix at Zandvoort gave us almost everything. Changing weather, a red flag, Max Verstappen crashing out at home, a brilliant restart from Kimi Antonelli, a comeback from Lando Norris, different tire strategies, Ferrari drama, Mercedes team orders, virtual safety cars, and a podium fight that continued into the closing laps. But above everything else, this was Lando Norris showing exactly why he is the reigning world champion. Things didn't go perfectly. He lost the lead. His strategy required patience. The late virtual safety car created another threat. But every time the race changed, Norris adapted. And when his opportunity finally arrived, he took it. Lando Norris wins the 2026 Dutch Grand Prix. Kimi Antonelli takes another massive result for the championship. George Russell completes the podium. And Zandvoort signs off with one final dramatic Formula One race. Now the championship moves on to Monza. And after what we just saw in the Netherlands, one question is becoming impossible to ignore. Is Lando Norris really back in the championship fight? Let me know what you think in the comments. Was Norris the best driver of the weekend? Could Mercedes have done anything differently to help Antonelli win? And what did you make of Ferrari's strategy? If you enjoyed this breakdown, hit the like button, subscribe to Racecraft Explained, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next Formula One analysis. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you after the next race.